What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Waste World Podcast. I'm your host, Gage Edwards, back again with a fun conversation or an insightful conversation around the waste industry. Today's topic revolves around food waste, as food waste remains a persistent challenge in the industry. You know, from households and grocery stores, restaurants, we're talking policy halls in Washington. How we manage food touches climate, affordability, food insecurity, and operational efficiency. It touches everyone. Food waste is the great connector because somewhere someone is wasting food due to a mountain of reasons. But as we move into 2026, momentum is building. You know, there's new federal support, changing consumer behaviors driven by inflation, advances in AI, stronger private sector engagement. All of that is reshaping what is possible in food waste. And today's episode dives into where food waste reduction stands right now and what's coming next. We'll be covering with my guest today, this kind of gives away who it is, ReFED put out a food waste forecast for 2026. We'll be covering that. We'll be covering simple solutions to make it home, or to take it home to reduce your food waste. Restaurants who have to get on board, policy who has to shape up. Again, the great connector. We could all play a part in this. So again, our conversation today is grounded by ReFED's newly released report, the 2020. Oh my God, I'm burping in the middle of that. I'm so sorry. ReFED's newly released 2026 food waste forecast, which highlights emerging trends, policy developments, and the strategies that could drive meaningful reductions in the years ahead. So, hope you learned something from today. Hope you hear something new, something insightful, something interesting. And if you do, make sure you share this episode of the podcast with a friend. Make sure you subscribe to the Waste World Podcast on your podcasting service of choice. Podcasting service choice. You know what I mean. And leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. Don't comment on my awful burp in the intro moment. Leave that out of it. Anyway, enjoy the podcast. Joining me today is Sara Burnett, Executive Director of ReFED. Sara brings a unique blend of scientific, corporate, and nonprofit leadership to the food waste conversation. Prior to leading ReFED, she spent 18 years at Panera Bread, where she pioneered the company's clean food commitments and led national efforts around food donation, sustainability, and ingredient transparency. She began her career as a food scientist and supply chain expert and has since become a leading voice in food system strategy, sustainability, and impact-driven innovation. At ReFED, Sara helps guide data-informed solutions that address food waste across prevention, recovery, and recycling. Sara, how are you? Thank you. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Gage. I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm happy to have you here on the, heels of the ReFED report that came out, which we covered on waste360.com. I'm excited to go over that with you. Sounds like you've got a pretty extensive background. So first, before we dive into the meat of our conversation today, who are you? Like, if someone's listening and they don't know who you are, can you give us a little details about your career path, how you got here?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I am a scientist turned kind of strategist is what I always say. And I spent nearly 20 years on kind of the business side of the house and actually running sustainability programs for food businesses, primary being Panera Bread. And I started my career in the supply chain. So the good news is that I have seen waste literally throughout the entire supply chain. I spent so many years actually in field, in manufacturing plant, in restaurant. So I've seen it firsthand across the entire supply chain. And I was able to bring that over to ReFED. So I joined the team about a year and a half ago and get to work alongside the team, really trying to drive down food waste across the US.
Now, before I get into my super serious questions, are you just totally tired of cheddar broccoli soup?
You know what? I think there was a tipping point about like 3 years in that you just are like, nope, I'm not going to eat that anymore. I will say, because I will always say I love the Panera Bread, you never get tired of cinnamon crunch bagels, no matter how many you eat. So
fair. Yeah, it's, you know what? It's a strong part of my diet. So it's good to know that I'll never get tired of those.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk. So ReFED 2026 food waste forecast. That kind of highlights, these first ever wins in 2025. From your perspective, why did last year feel like a turning point for food waste reduction in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to look at the numbers and be like, oh, this is still a massive problem. Ultimately, it is. About 30% of food is still surplus, whether it's, from farm all the way to landfill, 30% of food that's produced is not eaten. And that is a huge, massive problem. But I would say what felt different and what really in reality was different in 2025 is we saw momentum, progress, and action across all the stakeholders, because food waste is a system-wide problem. It's not just that it's easy to blame it on one part of the supply chain. It's just retailers who order too much milk and they're throwing half of it away, right? It isn't. It is a system-wide problem, but we saw action across the whole entire supply chain and across every stakeholder. So, examples. On the policy side, we're seeing bipartisan action. We're seeing state-level policies that are passing. In 2025, many of those went through, which are really great. We're seeing food businesses who are adopting and taking new action. Part of that's driven by the U.S. Food Waste Pact that doubled in size last year and represents over 50%, for example, of the retail market is representative of their food businesses who are committed to reducing food waste day in, day out, and they have real targets and are taking real action. And then we have, funding from the federal government. Right now, the federal government is still very invested. They're investing even in a consumer campaign, because a lot of food we waste is also in our own homes. It's those leftovers we don't eat. And so there's just progress across the board, and we're just super excited about. If it was just one sector or one piece, it would be hard to be excited. But for me, we're seeing levers being pulled across the entire system, and we're seeing reductions. So it's just really exciting time in the movement, and a lot to build on in 2026 with our outlook of lots of things to look forward to and continue to research and understand.
Yeah, and that's good to know, because it's always like when I have these conversations, it takes a village. We have to start at the top with policy. We have to hit and go all the way to the bottom to the people at home. It's all the way through. We can't just blame one person for doing the wrong thing. We've all probably done the wrong thing at one point, but we all need to do the right thing also to kind of put the pieces back together. Am I right thinking that?
You are 100% right. We all have a role to play. And we all have a role to play, whether it's as individuals, whether it's business leaders, and each one of our decisions actually motivates and influences the rest of the supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. If I don't buy that last gallon of milk from the grocery store, they're going to get rid of it. But if I buy it, I turn it into buttermilk and I use it over the next few weeks, then I have actually solved a problem. And so there's lots of different things that we can all be doing personally and as business leaders.
Excellent. Now let's kind of talk about inflation, food prices. That's changing how people shop and they cook and they eat. So how confident are you that these consumer behavior shifts will translate into measurable reductions in household food waste this year?
We're in the middle of a deep analysis on residential waste and understanding how that is. Right now, today, consumers, that is the number one place where food is wasted. Now, part of that is food in our own fridge. Part of that is also the leftovers that we have from restaurants. So it's plate waste as well combined. But what we see across the spectrum is when inflation goes up, high prices go up, there's some behaviors that change right away. And we know this, like we start shopping at big box stores or discount stores, right? We start buying maybe private label brands instead of that, the organic highest price item. We make these trades. Those are the first behaviors we always see consumers make, regardless of why food prices are going up. But what we're starting to see in other research, whether it's from Brian Rowe at Ohio State University or others, but also some Nielsen research that we did just with Gen Pop consumers in November, is consumers are starting to actually address their food waste in different ways and manage their food budget in different ways, including they're using leftovers more. They're eating more of those instead of throwing them away or letting them die in the back of your fridge, and get moldy. They're reducing their consumption of non-essential items. So they're not buying that extra treat that maybe they might not like. I bought something like that over the holidays, and I felt super guilty about it because I thought I was going to like that, but nobody likes it. We're starting to buy less of those things because our dollars are just getting stretched. Some of that's from food, and some of that's just broader inflation that's driving that. So we're starting to see those things get reported. And Again, I can't tell you definitively. This is exactly A is causing B, but we're seeing a lot of information that's guiding us to say people are better managing their shopping cart, what's in their fridge, and how they're using leftovers, which we think is going to ultimately, hopefully, drive down some food waste.
Yeah, that's something I'm doing in my household because I'm budgeting pretty tightly around groceries because I'm not like a food conscious person. I am just terrible in the kitchen. When I look at a stove, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea here. So I'm really lowering like what I'm spending and making sure I'm only getting essential items, but I'm also looking at what I have left over throughout the week. And I'm using shamelessly ChatGPT and I'm plugging in my ingredients and I'm saying like, what can I do with what I have here so this doesn't go to waste? And it will give me a recipe. I'm like, cool, I can use what I have here and I don't have to waste it. It doesn't have to be thrown away. Now, I am also buying non-essentials like ice cream sandwiches because I can't stop eating them. But, that's just for me, right?
But you're eating them. So for me, you know what? If you're consuming them, great, awesome, right. Enjoy them. Yes.
That's what I'll keep telling myself, and I won't pay attention to the scale.
There's no judgment here. No judgment.
All right. So we're also seeing food businesses prioritizing solutions embedded directly into its core operations. Why is that shift or this shift away from behavior-dependent solutions so important for scalability?
Yeah. So, when we think about regardless of what type of food business you are, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a restaurant operator or you're a grocery store operator, ultimately, the biggest thing, the hardest thing to do is to get your employee to do something different. They're used to the same way that they do things. And to motivate them to change, it's a big hurdle. It takes a lot of training, a lot of information. If you can make it quick, easy, and efficient for them, they're going to do it all day long, right? It's as simple as the model of like, if you move the trash can closer to where the employee is working at, they're more likely to put the garbage in the trash and not just let it pile up, right? Until they have to take it all out. And so for us, it's those sorts of things that are really huge burdens for businesses, especially right now when businesses across the economy, all of them are fighting other types of inflation, including labor inflation. And so for them, they're saying, hey, how do I make it easier for my employees? How do I do less labor and invest less there? And so they're looking at solutions that are super easy to implement and are no-brainers for people. And it is everything from like thinking about, is it seamless, affordable, and efficient for the whole team? This is one of the things that I think we cited in our paper is like Mill and their technology going into Whole Foods. How do we make it easier for folks to compost? Well, one of the huge burdens for doing that is having to have compost bins all over an operation, having to then take it outside, then also having to manage all of the issues related to having wet compost out in your parking lot, right? Rats, et cetera. Well, Mill can solve that by dehydrating that. They're doing it at scale for Whole Foods in there, not with little residential size, but they're building these new things. So those are the types of solutions that are really exciting. There's also things that you can do up front that, again, make it so that an employee doesn't have to do anything different. Restaurants, for example, the number one thing that is wasted in restaurants is plate waste. It's food that we sell to the customer and they don't eat. So we could go through a bunch of different hoops to try to waste less back of house, to trim that strawberry a little bit better so you're not losing half of it to the trash can when you trim it. But ultimately, what you want to do is just serve maybe a different portion to a consumer who has a lighter appetite. You're wasting less. The employee doesn't have to do anything different. They're still making a salad. Maybe they're just making a half salad and a full salad. It just makes it much easier and it's more efficient and cost efficient for that business to do it. So we're seeing a lot of these types of solutions work for both the economic times that we're in, but also it's just good business practice. If it's more efficient, more effective, especially cost effective, that can scale overnight. I can tell a CFO, this is a good investment because it's going to help me spend less labor hours and I'm going to get the job done. Why would we not sign off on that, right?
Right. Yeah. And going back to the portion size, that's something I learned early on from Kitchen Nightmares when I saw, Gordon Ramsay's like, why are we serving a whole pound of nachos? We don't need to serve this. Let's cut all this back because most of it does get wasted. I even think about when I go to a restaurant, I'm like, I can't eat all of this. No one can eat all of this. What are we doing? So I'm going to get thrown away. So I think, that's a food reduction, food waste reduction situation and cost reduction. They're saving money by not making the biggest plate they can come up with.
It's efficiency for the restaurant, and it's helping them still meet the needs of the consumers. Just adding a few things on that, just because it's interesting. We just put out research about this. Right now, almost about 60% of Gen Pop consumers are saying like they're willing to actually consider and more likely to consider a restaurant if you offered flexible portions. So whether it's you're offering a small, medium, and large, or you're just able to buy something without the side. Maybe I don't want 3 sides with my entree. I only want 2. Consumers are actually more likely to visit you. If you put in GLP-1 users, which are like 10% plus of the population right now, those folks are saying over 70% of them are saying, we're going to consider you and we're going to go see you. And they actually eat out more frequently. So like there's huge opportunities to make these small changes that will have a huge impact for food businesses.
Yeah. And I can agree with that, because when I see a sandwich go, hey, do you want the half sub? I'm like, yes, give me the half sub of the bag of chips. That's fine. I'm only doing the whole sub if I'm splitting with somebody, because I'm not eating that whole thing. And this is not going to say well. So let's do the half sub. All right. So we talked a little bit about the plate waste. Nobody knows at home, but I sent you the questions, so we're nailing it. We're flowing right through it. So everyone's prepared today, which is good because it makes for a good show. All right, so let's talk about the bipartisan support at the federal level for food waste reduction. So including Food Date Labeling Act. How meaningful is that consistency across administrations for long-term progress?
I mean, I think anybody who works or has ever been touched by policy work knows that maintaining momentum and driving policy change through takes a really long time. So having consistency across administrations, but both at the federal and the state level from a bipartisan perspective, makes everybody's lives easier. When it comes to food waste, I think it's really hard. We often call this like the stupidest problem ever, right? Nobody's going to raise their hand and be like, I wish we would waste more food. Like, I wish that farmer would work all day and I'm just going to like ditch half of what he grew. Or I spent all this money at the grocery store and half of it I'm going to throw out. Like, nobody wants to do that. It's bad for big economy, for food businesses. It's bad for farmers. It is bad for consumers. You know, for us, we waste on average $800 a year is what we're throwing in the trash per person. Depending on the person, it can be even more depending on what you're buying. So like, nobody wants that. And so for that, food waste is a bipartisan issue. Regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, you think, I want to help businesses be more economically viable, grow, and do good in our communities. I want to do good in my communities. I want to reduce waste. I want to not put pressure on landfills. I want to do all these things. And I want to help consumers save money. So everybody wants to follow this. We've seen that throughout the past administrations, whether it was Trump 1.0 or the current, or the previous other administrations. Everyone is kind of galvanized around this. On the Food Date Label Act in particular, which is about standardizing date labels, because date labels are super confusing. Now, if you've ever got, that loaf of bread that says sell by on it, you're like, does that mean that I can still eat it after the sell by date or not? Or a use by date versus an expiration date, what does those mean? Standardizing those labels is very, very helpful for consumers, because consumers don't know what to do, and they throw away a lot of food that is very wholesome and totally fine to eat because of that confusion. So we have bipartisan support in the Senate and the House on that. We have the EPA coming out with the Feed It Onward initiative. And again, continuing to do investment in consumer campaigns. So super exciting to have that. And what that does is allow us to have consistency across the nation for some of those things. California passed last year a Food Date Label Act, which is great. We're super excited about it, but it applies to California. Colorado's now introduced similar, but we know for us to get broad change and to get consistency, we need that federal policy. And it's exciting that we have that bipartisan support and continue to leverage it for all sorts of different things related to food waste, whether it's Food Date Label Act or other type of infrastructure, et cetera, that's needed across the nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't tell you how often I would buy something and it would say sell by and Best Buy on it, and it would just confuse my entire family and they wouldn't know what to do with it. I'm a big sniff test person. I'm like, if it looks fine, we're probably fine. We'll go through it, and we're cooking it anyway, so it's gonna cook out the bad stuff.
I mean, there is the general consensus is it's a look, smell, and touch.
Yep.
Is it slimy? Does it smell bad? Does it look right? Like, those are usually pretty good for most products, and for most consumers. It's the easiest way to do it. The other thing at the federal level, just because I know your audience is excited about it, and it's part of food labeling is, or food waste reduction is composting. And so part of that consumer is, there's part that's focused on food waste reduction at home, but part of it is also about composting and getting it, education awareness in communities about composting. And so it's exciting, again, that the federal government continues to invest in that case, the EPA is investing in that.
Yeah, our food doesn't have to be waste. It can have a second life,
it can be diverted. Yep.
Right. All right. Now, so we're talking for food labeling for a nationwide scale, but let's talk about states balancing policy. Those commitments with limited funding for infrastructure like organics, recycling, how do we see states balancing that?
Yeah, I mean, that is really tough. As you know, states' budgets are very constrained. Whether it's, new SNAP expenses that are now falling on states, et cetera, there's lots of different reasons why states have to reallocate some of their funding. I don't think all hope is lost here. There's a couple things. One is that we have bipartisan support. Two is that we have states that have made progress and are showing progress. Massachusetts just published some great results late last year about their organic waste regulations and how much that is contributing to their economy. And it's good for a lot of different reasons, not just reducing organics into landfill. So we're seeing good case studies of why it matters. We're seeing a lot of bills introduced, and there's lots under consideration. But also, I would say constraint breeds innovation, right? There's so many other models that we can look at. And I hope that over the next few years, as we sort out these big infrastructure budgets, we also look at things like, hey, there's some really interesting thing about like methane biodigesters and anaerobic digesters, things that are like good, just solid business models for communities to invest in, food manufacturers to invest in, et cetera. There's different funding models. I think it's either Massachusetts or Maine. So correct me later if I'm wrong, but just introduce, for example, they're doing some taxes related to help funding infrastructure, some kind of like state sales tax here in my community, support school bond issues, et cetera. And there's others who are adjusting tipping fees to try to figure out, like there's all these different models that people are testing to try to figure out how do we create it. And then there's also just efficiencies. There's some communities that are saying, hey, we can't do curbside compost pickup anymore, but we can afford, and it's efficient for us to drop off. Mm-hmm. And we can continue the programs with, slightly more efficiency that will fit with the current budget. And so I'm optimistic about, there's so many leaders across communities, across every type of state, across the nation that are continuing to work on this. They're continuing to innovate, and they are finding unique ways of like getting those dollars out into their community and building new infrastructure that's needed.
Yeah. And I always like when I see community drop-off sites, because usually that can cut down on contamination too. When people are like, oh, the people who are taking things to a drop-off site, they know what they're taking. They're heavily involved in what's going on. So that usually I find is a better method than curbside, but I like people to have their options if they're not able to get to a drop-off site. Just my thinking. I don't know.
Case in point, we do not have community compost here in my community, or we don't have it in my community. I do my own compost, but if the indication is of my teenagers and what they put in the commingled recycle bin and how much of that is contaminated, I know that there is definitely some things at the compost that probably follows that same trajectory.
Yes, the less informed household probably is, on that contaminated side. So let's talk. So we briefly spoke about CES before we started our call. So I'm curious. So where do because CES is littered with AI, so I'm going to jump right into that. Everyone knows where this is going. Where do we see AI having the most immediate and practical impact on food waste prevention in 2026?
I mean, AI is powering a lot of really awesome innovation. Mm-hmm. And so the things that we're already seeing that are starting to even scale just because AI has helped them move even faster. I mean, it is inventory trackers for these massive supply chains and figuring out what's being lost to where and where it's all traveling through and to. It is optical sorters that are using AI, both in restaurant, in grocery store like Mill and Whole Foods. There is optical sorting that's happening to your, we were just talking about compost that are happening actually in compost facilities and saying, hey, how can we do better decontamination? To robotic harvesters. Like there's some folks we had a catalytic grant fund this last year, and one of the recipients was a grantee who's using AI to know what to harvest when a robot's going through a field. And they're picking things at peak harvest, they're leaving other things, and they're able to pass through the field multiple times, harvesting when product is ready. So there's AI powering tons and tons of solutions. And there's not just like one that's unlocking. All of these are starting to unlock. I would also say that I can't also overlook what you said earlier of there's so many people who use smart devices in their homes. And, I'm asking my smart device, which I'm not going to say because it's sitting next to me.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to Gemini and I'm saying, hey, I have cilantro, avocados, and, some old salsa. What should I make? And it's going to tell me to make some guacamole and how I can make that with, the 1 tablespoon of salsa that I have left.
Right.
Those are actually, we shouldn't overlook those like less sexy versions of AI that exist in our world today.
Yeah. I think hopefully a lot of people are thinking of AI and its like creative abilities to make just maybe the worst stuff on the internet. But at the same time, there's a lot of practical use for even the things that are like readily available to us for free that we just aren't using in the right ways. It's available. We should be using it. Or at least, I'm using the ChatGPT version to make so I can make a flatbread at home. I can make a barbecue chicken pizza. Easy, because I have chicken, I have barbecue sauce. Throw it in the oven. Fine. So, yeah. And to date we're recording this on January 15th. Who's to say in a month there isn't some big innovation through AI that we are just like, oh, can't believe that happened. Interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I will say, like, even at ReFED, for folks who are on the practitioner side of this podcast of saying, like, we're using it to look at massive swaths of research across the globe and find new solutions and dig into academic research that we might never have been able to because we can't read 1,000 papers. But we can find that there's 15 different papers that are on one solution that we're like, wow, that's actually really powerful. We should be talking to food businesses about this. Even though it might seem nascent because it's still in research, but actually it has huge potential. So there's just so much that can be AI for good. There's challenges, there's things to work on, but I do still think that it can be AI for good when used correctly in the movement.
Right. And kind of let's talk about the movement there. So I'm curious for framing food waste as a social issue, not an environmental one. So that, how does that change who gets involved there?
Yeah. I think that this goes back to when you think about food waste, you could talk about food waste as farmer livelihoods and how we're wasting resources on farm. Their financial livelihoods, as well as the work that goes into the amount of cropland that's harvested and wasted, that's not creating any income for their family. We could talk about it in terms of hunger and nutrition security in our country. 1 in 7 people are going hungry. That number might actually be even higher than that. But yet only about 2% of surplus food is actually donated. We can talk about it within all of those areas, and we can talk about it in absolutely all of those areas. And what that does is help us bring more people into the movement. Like what we talked about at the beginning, this is a system problem where everybody has a role. We're working with farmers, we're working with food manufacturers, distributors, that's all logical. We're also working with food recovery organizations. We're working with animal feed companies who are saying, hey, what can't we go to donation? What can we though bring on farm to feed, animals for animal production? What can we go and divert to composters or AD or biotics, whatever that might be. So there is a role for absolutely everybody to play, but they all come to that in different ways. They might not have their heartstrings pulled by when we talk about food in a trash can, but they might say, my neighbor in need who doesn't have any food to eat, that matters. Mm-hmm. And that's how we get, whether it's individual people or leaders, to start joining the movement. That's how we have to start talking about this. And food waste, again, is a way that connects that whole system.
Yeah. It's almost like, this is not the solution, but like if we made food waste trendy on TikTok, more people, younger generations would get involved to kind of prevent that from happening and becoming a generational issue over and over and over again. Maybe something to think about. Instead of fast fashion on TikTok, maybe it's, hey, maybe don't throw that thing away. They just need simple reminders. Maybe it's that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's kind of direct our advice towards food businesses, policymakers, waste professionals for preparing for 2026. What would you want them to focus on right now to keep momentum going in this industry?
I mean, I think my targeted advice for each audience would be very different.
Sure.
I am going to say my broad call to action is personally and professionally, absolutely everybody has a place that they can play. As a consumer, what I can do is, one, adjust whatever my behaviors are. Start using a grocery list before you go to the grocery store. Know what you have and use what you have, and then shop for more, right? There's lots of tips and tricks. I can do that personally, or I can also use my wallet as a tool, right? I can start buying from brands that I know are taking action and who are trying to reduce their waste over time, because I care about that. That's what I can do as a consumer. As a, whether you're a policymaker or you're a business leader or you're an investor and funder of this work, all of them also have a role. I think for me, it is, my call to action is find your role. Everybody absolutely has a role, and take one small action. It doesn't mean that you have to completely overturn your whole operation, but really small incremental changes can have huge impacts. At a restaurant concept, if you reduce, you have 200 plates a day. If you reduce waste by 1 ounce on every plate, that's a huge amount over the course of a year, over the course of 10 years of your business. Then you extrapolate that over 200, 300, 400 restaurants. Those small changes matter, and don't discount that. Like, join the movement, take one small step, and help it build. It will build over time.
Almost like a little snowball effect there. Just kind of push it down the hill. Start small, get bigger. All right. That is the end of my questions, Sarah. So congratulations. You made it to the end here. Anything that I didn't cover in these questions that maybe you want to throw out to our listeners?
The Food Waste Solution Summit is coming up. It's May 19th through 21st in Charlotte. It is where all those stakeholders come together. We have food business leaders, nonprofit leaders. We have consumer advocates. We have funders all getting together talking about how do we move this work forward. And so just inviting everybody to join us. That is a place for us to make plans, collaborate, and it's a pre-competitive space where we're all talking about how to get this work done together.
Excellent. I don't have that booked on my calendar yet, but it is on my radar, so maybe you'll see me there. Maybe I'll find a chance, because Charlotte's not too far from me, so that's a quick little flight.
Cool. Yeah. Well, and ping Nate. We'll get you a media pass. So
perfect.
Let us know.
Whatever makes me feel more, really important at these shows, I'm all for.
Yeah. Well, and you can fly under the radar. We're not going to walk you around and be like, here's Gage.
Well, that's actually what I prefer. Let's do that part. All right. So, Sarah, where can people find more about ReFED, more about yourself?
Yeah. So, for more information, go to refed.org. Mm-hmm. And there you'll find all the information about ReFED, our work, but also the Insights engine, and dig in there where you can learn more about where's food being wasted and what, and more importantly, are all the solutions to wasted food. So go there to get more.
Excellent. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing these awesome insights for food waste in 2026.
Thank you so much, Gage.
All right, that wraps up today's conversation. Thank you again to Sarah for being here for the Waste World podcast. Just to highlight, we covered how rising food prices are changing consumer behavior, and why food businesses are embedding waste solutions directly into operations, the growing role of AI prevention and tracking, and how bipartisan support and social impact funding could accelerate progress in 2026 and beyond. Remember, food waste, the great connector. We all have our hands in it. We all want to take our hands out of it. And it's got that bipartisan support, like we talked about in the episode. It is a problem we all recognize that we all need to tackle together. Food waste reduction continues to prove that sustainability isn't just about doing the right thing. It's about smarter systems, better data, and stronger outcomes for communities, businesses, and the environment. It's better for everyone. So if you want to learn more, make sure you do go and check out ReFED's 2026 Food Waste Forecast. You can find that on their website. Explore how their data and insights are helping move the needle across the food system. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the Waste World podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you found it interesting or insightful, share it with a friend, a colleague, somebody in this space who wants to learn more, and just kind of have some good content to source in the future. Leave us a rating or a review. That'd be awesome. It would make me smile. And, pay attention for more episodes. Visit waste360.com for more coverage from the waste, recycling, and sustainability industry, and read up on something awesome over there. As always, thanks for listening. And remember, it's our world. Let's not waste it.